Hitting record. Hello, everybody. It's David Perlmutter from Quantum Listing. Thank you for joining us today. And we are very lucky to have one of my personal heroes, Nir Eyal, as our guest today. I first learned about you through my friend Tony Brancato, who at the time was running the digital side of the New York Times, and then he left and went to IMDb. Now he's at a healthcare company, but he was telling me about Hooked, and it was right when I was starting Quantum Listing, and so I read it. I loved it. I told dozens of people about it, and I was very happy to see that you're coming out with a new book, Indistractable, which of course I pre-ordered and have read and listened to, and I was especially thrilled when you agreed to be part of our webinar today. I think it's right on the money in terms of what our society needs today. And before I go any further, I will tell our viewers a little bit about you. So Nir Eyal writes, consults, and teaches about the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. The MIT Technology Review dubbed Nir the prophet of habit-forming technology. And Nir founded 2 tech companies since 2003 and has taught at the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. He's the author of the best-selling book Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products, and Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life. In addition to blogging at nirandfar.com, and by the way, I'm a subscriber and recommend that you subscribe as well. Nir's writing has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, TechCrunch, and Psychology Today. Nir is also an active investor in habit-forming technologies. Some of his past investments include Eventbrite, which is on the New York Stock Exchange as EB, Refresh.io, which was acquired by LinkedIn, WorkLife, which was acquired by Cisco, Product Hunt, Marco Polo, Presence Learning, 7 Cups, Pana, Kahoot! Exclamation point, Byte Foods, FocusMate, and Anchor.fm, which was acquired by Spotify. And Nir is a graduate of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and like my son Ben, a graduate of Emory University in Atlanta. Welcome, Nir. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to be here. Thank you so much. So should we dive right into the presentation here?
Yes, let's.
All right, terrific. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening in. We have all seen how distracting the world is these days, right? We sit down with our friends for a cup of coffee, or we go out to dinner or lunch, and we see that half the people around the room are checking their devices as opposed to being fully present. Or maybe you found that in your own business, you sit down to do a big task that you're going to call those sales leads, you're going to work on that big project, you're going to do the thing you've been putting off, and yet somehow you're checking email or scrolling Slack channels or doing everything but the thing you said you would do. So my question is, what's going on? Why are we so distracted these days? And is it really our technology at fault, or is there something deeper going on? So the past several years, I've worked on this question of how do we control our attention and choose our life? How do we become indistractable? And this idea of trying to harness this skill that I think is the skill of the century came to me when I was with my daughter and had a wake-up call of my own in my own life. I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we had this beautiful afternoon planned where we could do whatever we wanted. And we had this book of activities that daddies and daughters could play together. And one of the activities in the book was to ask each other this question: if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you want? And I wish I could tell you what my daughter said, but I can't, because in that moment, I was distracted. I was looking at my phone, and whatever silly thing was on my device had captured my attention. And my daughter got the message that whatever was on my screen was more important than she was. So she left the room and decided to play with some toy outside. And so it was moments like that that really helped me understand that I needed to figure out this question of becoming indistractable. And if you ask me today, this would be the superpower that I would most want. We know that the jobs of the future require us to concentrate in order to come up with the kind of creative solutions that we need to find for our businesses. We know that loneliness is as detrimental to our mental health as to our physical health as smoking and obesity. And yet, how do we harness those relationships? How do we have true friendships if we are constantly looking at our devices as opposed to being fully present? And then, of course, when it comes to our kids, what kind of example are we setting if what our kids see of us is the top of our heads as we're busy scrolling away on our phones? So I really wanted to tackle this problem of how do we do what we say we're going to do? And I know that for many of you listening today, you already know what to do in your lives, right? You know that to generate more sales, to call more leads, you basically know what to do. But what we don't know what to do is this answer to this question of why don't we do the things we said we would do? Why do we keep getting distracted? And so we should take some comfort in knowing that this is not a new problem. That in fact, Plato talked about this very same problem 2,500 years ago. Well before the iPhone and Facebook and all these things we call so distracting, Plato talked about this problem of akrasia, the tendency that we all have to act against our better judgment. He talked about this 2,500 years ago. So this is not a new problem. But it's a really fascinating question. I mean, if we know what to do, why don't we just do it? Right? We all basically know how to lose weight. We all basically know how to exercise. We all basically know that if we want better relationships with our family and friends, we have to be fully present. That if we want to do better at our job, we have to do the work, especially the hard stuff that other people don't want to do. The question is, why don't we just do it? And so a good place to start is to understand what is distraction exactly, and more specifically, what is the opposite of distraction? So if you ask most people what the opposite of distraction is, they'll tell you it's focus. But I actually don't agree. I don't think the opposite of distraction is focus. I think the opposite of distraction is traction. That if you look at the word, the etymology of the word, in fact, both traction and distraction come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And they both end, you'll notice, in the same 6 letters, A-C-T-I-O-N. That spells action. So traction is any action that pulls you towards what you want to do, things that you do with intent in your life. Now, the opposite of traction is distraction, anything that you do that pulls you away from what you plan to do. Anything that is not traction is, by definition, a distraction. So the reason this is so important is for 2 reasons. Number one, anything can be a distraction. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own life, right? How many times have you sat down at your desk and said, okay, now I'm going to work on that big project. I'm going to make those sales calls. I'm going to do that thing I've been procrastinating on. I'm finally going to do it right after I check email, right? Right after I do this one thing online, or right after I make this phone call. And so we get distracted by even the things that feel productive, that feel worky, right? You have to check email at some point, right? But I would argue that's not work. That's pseudo work. And when we constantly allow ourselves to get distracted by these sorts of things, we are prioritizing the urgent at the expense of the important. Because if you don't make time for the things that you plan to do, you're constantly reacting all day long, reacting to meetings, reacting to phone calls, reacting to text messages with no time for reflection. And so we don't get time to do the things that are actually important because we're only doing the things that are urgent. Now, the other reason that this dichotomy is so important, number one, is that anything can be a distraction. The other reason is that anything can be traction. I argue that anything that you plan to do with your time, as long as you plan to do it and you follow through, is great. There's nothing wrong with it. We shouldn't have some kind of moral hierarchy that says that watching Netflix or connecting with friends on Facebook or even playing a video game is somehow morally inferior. What's the difference between playing Candy Crush and watching football on TV? There's no difference. If you do it on your schedule and it's according to your values, enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is we don't even allow ourselves to enjoy these tasks. I mean, how many of us feel guilty when we let ourselves watch a movie on Netflix, or we feel like we're slacking off when we check Facebook? And I would argue that as long as you do those things on your schedule with intent, they are traction, and you should enjoy them without guilt. And so I'm going to teach you how to do that, how to get more done in your day, but also to enjoy more of the tasks in your day that you find are fun, enjoyable, connect you to others, whatever it is that you want to do with your time and attention. That's what I'm going to show you how to do. Now, in order to understand how do we get more traction in our life and less distraction, we have to understand what prompts us to action. Two things. The first thing is what we call an external trigger. An external trigger is the ping, a ding, a ring, something that prompts you towards either traction or distraction. So of course it can be your phone, it can be your computer, it can also be a colleague, it can be somebody else, right? It can be your children, it can be your boss, anything in your outside environment that prompts you to either traction or distraction. Now, this is what most people think about when they think about distraction. They think about the things outside of themselves. But what I uncovered in my 5 years of research writing Indistractable is that in fact, most distraction does not start outside of us, but rather starts from within. It's called an internal trigger. An internal trigger is something that prompts us to either traction or distraction with some kind of uncomfortable emotional state. Okay, and it is these uncomfortable emotional states that prompt us to do everything in life. That in fact, if we want to understand and answer Plato's question of why do we do things against our better interest, we have to answer this question of why do we do everything and anything in our lives? And most people will tell you that the seat of motivation is the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, right? We've all heard of some version of carrots and sticks. This is how you motivate people, right? Wrong. It turns out that neurologically speaking, everything we do is not about the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but rather it is about pain all the way down. That in fact, everything we do, every action we take is about one thing, the desire to escape discomfort. That's it. That's why we do everything, even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations, right? Wanting, craving, desire, lusting. There's a reason we say love hurts, because neurologically speaking, that is exactly what is going on. We know this to be true in our bodies. Think about it physiologically. If you go outside and it's too cold, well, the brain tells you, hey, this isn't comfortable. Do something about it. Put on a jacket, buddy. And if you come back inside, now it's too hot. The brain tells you, oh, it's hot in here. This doesn't feel good. Take it off. If you feel hunger pangs, you eat. If you eat too much, now you feel stuffed. That doesn't feel good. So you stop eating. So everything we do is about a desire to escape discomfort. Those are physiological sensations, but the same holds true for psychological sensations. Consider, what do we do when we feel lonely? Well, we check Facebook. What about when we're feeling uncertain? We Google. And what about when we're feeling bored? Well, we check stock prices, sports scores, the news, Pinterest, Reddit. All of these things cater to uncomfortable emotional sensations. So if we are going to become indistractable, the first step has to be to master these internal triggers, to understand what it is driving us towards distraction. We have to understand the discomfort that we are trying to escape. That if we keep blaming the symptom, whether that's too much television, too much Facebook, too much work, right? We all know that workaholic that is escaping what's going on in their personal life by spending all their time in the office. What are they running away from? All of us need to identify that it's not the behavior that's the problem. It's the fact that we don't acknowledge that we are running away from our feelings, something we do not want to experience. And the solution to that discomfort is oftentimes found in the form of a distraction. And so the first step has to be to understand the discomfort we're trying to escape. And then we have to ask ourselves, what do we do about it? Well, there's only really two things that we can do about it. We can either fix the source of the problem, or we can learn to cope with it. So if we know what the source of the problem is, let's say it's a difficult, a problem at home, maybe it's a toxic workplace environment, whatever that problem is, if we can fix it, we absolutely should. But sometimes there are situations in our life that we can't necessarily escape from, that we can't necessarily fix. Not every pain point is something that we can necessarily quell. That part of being a human being is feeling uncomfortable sensations. In fact, one of the things that I really hate about the self-help industry these days is that a lot of people tell us that we're supposed to be happy all the time. That if you're not satisfied and happy, that something's wrong with you. And I think that is so untrue and unhelpful. We have to understand that part of what made our species so successful is that we are perpetually perturbed. We are always looking for more. That is what made our species so successful. And so the idea here is to not think that feeling bad is bad. I don't agree with that. In fact, there is nothing more natural and human than feeling these uncomfortable sensations, whether it's boredom, anxiety, fatigue, loneliness, uncertainty. There's nothing wrong with you when you feel these sensations. What we have to learn to do is to learn to cope with them in a healthier manner so that they lead us towards traction rather than distraction. So how do we do that? Let me give you some quick tips here. There's a lot more in the book, of course, but I want to give you just a quick overview. The first thing that we need to realize is that if all behavior is prompted by a desire to escape discomfort, if everything that you do is about looking to escape an uncomfortable sensation, that therefore means that time management is pain management. If you are not doing what it is you said you would do, it is because you are looking to escape an uncomfortable sensation. So time management is pain management. So how do we begin to learn to cope with that discomfort? Well, the first thing that we can do, psychologists tell us, is to simply note the sensation. Simply writing it down is the first step to gaining greater agency and control over that uncomfortable sensation. The next thing that we do is to get curious about that sensation, not with contempt, not to beat yourself up and say there's something wrong with you or there's something you have to change or something about you that's broken, but rather to ask yourself, where is that uncomfortable sensation coming from? Why am I feeling bored, uncertain, fatigued, stressed, lonely? Where is that sensation coming from? And then what we want to do is to learn how to surf the urge. When you experience one of these uncomfortable emotional states, right? Let's say you need to call some sales leads and it feels like a big burden. The idea here is to not beat yourself up, not to think, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for this, or I'm no good at this, or I have a short attention span, or I'm lazy. Don't do that. Instead, realize that these emotions are like waves. They crest and then they subside. And so your goal is to be a surfer on that wave, to ride out that sensation until it crests and goes away. Now, how do you do that? One technique that I use almost every single day is called the 10-minute rule. The 10-minute rule says that you can give in to any distraction, whether it's eating that piece of chocolate cake you don't want to have, or whether it's checking email when you should be making sales calls, or whatever it is that you're doing that you don't want to do. You tell yourself that you can give in to any temptation in just 10 minutes. Now, your job during those 10 minutes is to either get back to the task at hand or explore that sensation with curiosity rather than contempt. And you will find that by the end of those 10 minutes, if you just explore that sensation or get back to work at the thing you really wanted to do, 9 times out of 10, you will find that by the time the 10 minutes roll around, that sensation is gone and you can get back to the thing you wanted to do. Okay. The next thing that we want to do after we master the internal triggers, and by the way, I'm giving you a very quick overview so we make sure we can leave time for a Q&A here. There's a lot more in the book about how we can master our triggers, how we can reimagine the task to make it something that we actually want to do as opposed to feel like we have to do. And then finally, how we can reimagine our temperament. So there's a lot more in the book, but again, I'm giving you a high-level overview here. The next thing that you can do is to make time for traction. I interviewed hundreds of people for this book over the past 5 years, and I spoke with many people who are masters of their time and attention, who are indistractable. And then I interviewed a lot of people who are constantly distracted, whose lives is constantly being shifted from one thing to the other by someone else. And one common trait I found among people who found that they were very distracted is that they would complain to me about how distracting everything is and how they can't get anything done and how they just can't seem to focus because their boss wants this and their kids want that. And did you see what just happened on Twitter? And gosh, everything is so distracting. And then when I'd ask them, wow, that's really tough. I'm sorry to hear that. Can you tell me what you got distracted from? What is it that you wanted to do that you didn't accomplish? What was it in your calendar that you planned for? And they'd kind of look at me funny and take out their calendar and show it to me. And 9 times out of 10, it was blank. There was nothing on their calendar. And according to some studies, 2/3 of Americans don't keep any sort of a schedule. Well, how can you call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from? You can't. Everything is a distraction unless you know what you plan to do with your time. And so that means we have to start keeping a detailed schedule for how we want to spend our time for every minute of the day. Now, this technique is a very, very powerful technique. It sounds onerous. It sounds like it's a lot of work, but let me tell you, I'm not just telling you to plan out the drudgery. I'm not telling you to just plan out the work tasks. I want you to plan out everything that helps you live out according to your values. So if some of your values includes physical fitness, is that on your calendar? If some of your values include being with friends and family, is that on your schedule? If scheduling time for yourself to play video games or watch YouTube videos, great, there's nothing wrong with it. But I want you to have that time on your calendar so that you can use these services on your schedule, not on the app makers, not on someone else's schedule. And the way we do this is by doing what's called making a time box calendar. So I want you to plan for every minute of your day. Now, this doesn't mean that if you fall on track, you're a bad human being or you need to beat yourself up. No, the only reason we want to do this is so that we will know what is the difference between traction and distraction for our day. So many of us have these big dreams of, oh my goodness, I'm going to call 100 sales leads. I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to make a screenplay. I'm going to start a side business. We have all these big plans. How about instead of making these plans that take years and years, why don't we first start with next week? The people who I found did not get distracted throughout their day. The people who were incredibly productive, had higher levels of well-being, happier people in their day-to-day lives were people who planned their day. Why? Because without this kind of schedule, you always feel like you're never enough. You always feel like you didn't finish the to-dos on your to-do list, and you feel guilty about wanting to do something fun. Or you have so many things on your to-do list that you say, screw it, I'm never going to get to it anyway, so let me distract myself. Let me do something that's actually fun. Rather than when you have a time box schedule and you get to the end of your day and you have time in your day to do something you enjoy, you can do it guilt-free. You can actually enjoy it because it's exactly what you plan to do with your time. So what we want to do is to make time for traction. We need to plan the time, not the output. Plan the inputs, right? So many of us, we have a big, long to-do list of 100 things that we want to do, but of course, we never get to them. And we keep recycling from one day to the next, all of these things we didn't accomplish. As opposed to if you plan the input, the output will follow. Just plan the time. Don't put on your calendar, finish this, finish this, finish that. You don't always have control over those tasks, right? You need the numbers from Charlie and you need the images from Juliet and you need all these things from other people. So you can't always control the output. But what you can control is the input. So make the only goal to work on a task without distraction for a fixed period of time. I will call sales leads for 30 minutes. Not call all my sales leads, not call 25 sales leads. Call sales leads for 30 minutes without distraction. That should be your goal, not these big, ambitious goals of, conquering the world, because the fact is you won't get to it. Just make the goal to do one thing at a time without distraction. And if you do that, if you plan the input, the output will follow. Then what we want to do is to spend less time communicating and more time concentrating. We are so busy with all of this reactive work, reacting to emails, reacting to text messages, reacting to phone calls, that we have no time for reflection. If you are a knowledge worker, your job, I don't care what you do, whether it's in marketing or sales or you're an executive, you have one job. Your job is to come up with novel solutions to hard problems. That is what you do for a living. But here's the thing, you cannot come up with novel solutions to hard problems unless you have time to think. And if that time is not in your day, it ain't gonna happen. You're going to get distracted with emails or Facebook or the news, or something is going to gobble up your day unless you plan time for the focused work that you need to get things done. Because the average American knowledge worker, if you subtract out the time they spend on emails and meetings, the average American knowledge worker has about an hour and 40 minutes for everything else in their day. And that doesn't include bathroom breaks and lunch and all that. All they have time for is meetings and emails all day long. And so that's something that needs to change. If we need time to focus, we have to make time for it in our day. Now, the third step to becoming indistractable is to hack back the external triggers. Now, we all know about these external triggers that come coupled with email and Slack notifications and text messages, the pings, dings, and rings in our everyday lives that can lead us towards traction or distraction. But there's one industry where external triggers are literally a matter of life and death. If I were to ask you, what is the third leading cause of death in the United States of America? I'll give you the first two. Number one is heart disease. Number two is cancer. What would you think number three is? Accidents, Alzheimer's maybe? No, not even close. The third leading cause of death, if it was a disease, would be prescription mistakes. Patients inside healthcare facilities getting the wrong medication or the wrong dosage of medication from a healthcare practitioner. 200,000 Americans, some studies say, are harmed when nurses give them the wrong medication. Now, most hospitals just think to themselves, well, what are we going to do? It's the cost of doing business. Okay, what can we do about this? Until a brave group of nurses at UCSF decided to tackle this problem and found that this problem occurred because of distraction. That nurses were interrupted on average 10 times every time they were dosing out medication. And when they were distracted, when they were interrupted by their colleagues, they were making mistakes. And the tragedy is that the nurses didn't even realize they were making these mistakes, right? It wasn't until much later that they realized, oh my goodness, what did I do? That's when they realized they had an error, that they made these horrible mistakes. And some people died as a consequence of these mistakes. Now, why do I tell you this story? How can we relate this to our own lives? Because I want you to understand that you are just like these nurses. Okay, maybe you're not dealing with life or death consequences, but the fact is you also don't realize how much better your work output could be if you were indistractable. Just like those nurses didn't realize that they were hurting people until it was much too late, we think we're doing a great job. We're doing our best, but we don't realize how much better we could be if we were indistractable. So here's what these nurses did. These nurses came up with an ingenious solution that reduced prescription mistakes by 88%. 88% reduction in these mistakes with a very simple solution. You know what the solution was? It wasn't a fancy app. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar retraining program. It was plastic vests. Cheap plastic vests that these nurses would wear that said, drug round in progress, do not disturb. And that message told their colleagues that they should not be interrupted. They were doing something that required focus and they should not be bothered for that time. Now, what's the lesson here? Why do I tell you this story? Because we can do something very similar in our own workplaces. Many of you I know work in open floor plan offices, right? Open floor plan offices are a hotbed of distraction. Well, what if we did something like this? What if we started using these screen signs? Every copy of my book, Indistractable, has one of these screen signs right in the book. You pull it out of the book, you fold it into thirds, and you put it on your computer monitor. And it tells your colleagues, hey, I'm indistractable right now. Please come back later. If you like, I give you a link where you can actually print one of these for yourself. What we can also do is to use our technology to hack back technology. So many of our phones, all Android and Apple devices now come with this piece of software that is called Do Not Disturb While Driving. And here's how Do Not Disturb While Driving works. When you need to get focused work done, you turn on Do Not Disturb While Driving. And if someone calls or texts you when you are doing your focused work, they will get an auto reply that says, I'm sorry, I can't talk right now, but if this is urgent, text me with the word urgent. right? So this solves this fear that many of us have. Let's be honest, it's an excuse that, well, I can't do focused work because what if somebody needs me? What if there's something really urgent? No problem. They'll text you back with the word urgent if it's really important, you need to call me right now kind of thing. But for the vast majority of the time, you'll find that if you take 30 minutes or 45 minutes, people can wait a little while until you do your focused work. Now, the next thing that we can do is to hack back all of these external triggers that plague us in our physical as well as digital workspace. Many of us work on devices that look like this. What a mess, right? All of these external triggers are incredibly distracting, even if you don't realize that they are. So we don't have to live this way. We can remove all of those external triggers so that we have a clean workspace that is not cluttered by all of these external triggers. We can do the same for our phones. We don't need to receive every ping and ding all day long. We can hack back all of those external triggers so that we are not constantly tempted towards distraction. So to hack back these external triggers, the first thing we need to ask ourselves is this trigger serving me or am I serving it? If the external trigger is leading you towards traction, something you wanted to do, well then terrific, it's serving you. But if it's leading you to something you'll later regret, sort of like when I was with my daughter, and instead of doing the thing I planned to do, being with her, I was using my device, well, now it had led me towards distraction. So remove those notifications that aren't serving you, adjust those notification settings, and then finally what we wanted to do is to leave distracting devices outside of our meetings. We need to change our company culture and realize that if we want to get work done at work, we can't all be on our devices, right? If we are going to do meetings, if we're going to have a meeting in the real world, we need to be present both in body and mind. So I suggest having only one laptop per meeting to record the notes, and everyone else can leave those devices outside. We don't all need to be on our devices because it just wastes so much time when our brains aren't really in the room, when they're somewhere else. Finally, the last step is to prevent distraction with pacts. Pacts are what we call a pre-commitment device. It's when we make a promise ahead of time to make sure that we don't get distracted by something later on. Now, the first recorded case of someone making a pre-commitment comes to us from the story of Ulysses. 2,500 years ago, this story tells of a Greek hero who has to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens. Now, the Sirens are these mythical creatures that sing this magical song that anyone who hears crashes their ship onto the shore of the Sirens Island where they die. Now, Ulysses knows this is going to happen, so he prepares his crew. He tells them to put wax in their ears to make sure they can't hear the siren song. And he also instructs them to bind him to the mast of the ship and tells them, no matter what I do, no matter what I say, don't let me go. And you know what? The plan works. He's able to sail his ship past the island of the Sirens without getting distracted. So why do I tell you this story? How can we learn from this? Well, it turns out that we also can make these pre-commitments. We can make these pacts with ourselves to make sure we don't do something we don't want to do. Ironically, we can use tech to block out tech. Here are two tools I use every day. On my Mac, I use self-control on my desktop. It blocks out websites that I don't want to distract me during the day. And then here's the Forest app that I use on my iPhone every day. Whenever I do focused work, I take out this app. I dial in how much time I want to do focused work for. And if I pick up my app, my phone, and do anything with it, this little virtual tree dies. Now, it's enough of a little stupid reminder, right? It's just a silly little virtual tree, but it reminds me, nope, that's not what you want to do right now. You wanted to focus and do something else right now, so don't pick up your phone. Very simple tool, very, very effective. We can also get a focus friend to help us stay on track. Having another person that you work next to that you say, oh, I really have this big project, please help me stay on task, can be a great way to make sure we don't fall off track. If you don't have access to someone you can work next to, or perhaps you work from home, you can get yourself a FocusMate at focusmate.com. This is a company I like so much, I actually invested in the company. This is a company where you sign up for a certain period of time. So you sign up, you have this calendar there on the left. You sign up for a time period when you want to do focused work. You're matched with another person. You log in at that period of time, and you see them, they see you, and you both get to work. And just by seeing that other person, this can be an incredibly effective way to stay on task. So we can reduce distraction with pacts. We can use tech to block out tech distraction, but let me give you one word of warning. Okay, you have to be careful here because these pacts can backfire. That some people, when they fall off the wagon, when they fall off track, they have a really tough time getting back on task. They take it very hard. And so we want to make sure that we use this tactic last, after you have mastered the internal triggers, after you've made time for traction, after you've hacked back the external triggers. This is what we do as a last resort. Furthermore, we want to make sure that when we fail, as we all invariably will on the path to becoming indistractable, we want to make sure that we give ourselves, that we treat ourselves with self-compassion. That people who are more self-compassionate have been found to be much more likely to achieve their long-term goals. So how do we cultivate self-compassion? We talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend. So if I told you about this story of my daughter when I was with her and I failed by getting distracted when I planned to be fully present with her, what would you say to me if you were my good friend? Would you tell me I'm a horrible father, that I'm a terrible human being? Not if you were my friend, you wouldn't. And yet I would tell myself these things all the time. And it wasn't true, and it wasn't helpful. And here's what else isn't helpful. This idea that technology is hijacking our brains, that it's addicting all of us. That is not true, because clearly there is so much that we can do every single day to become indistractable. We can manage these internal triggers. We can make time for traction. We can hack back the external triggers, and we can reduce distraction with pacts. Don't let anyone tell you that we are powerless. Clearly, we are not. And so the message I want to leave with you today is that we can do this. We all can make sure that we can get the best out of technology without letting it get the best of us. We can all become indistractable. Thank you very much.
But
And with that, I want to ask one quick favor while I'm taking questions here. If you see this slide here, there's a URL. It says opinion2.us, or you can just point your iPhone at this QR code. I would love to hear what you thought of the presentation. Please let me know. I'll give you a link to my slides as soon as you finish this very short survey. It's only 5 questions. Would love to know what you think. And of course, if you have any questions that we didn't address today, please go to my website, nirandfar.com. You can see that at the bottom there. And there's a contact form. Please send me any questions later on. Happy to help.
that was great, and I can tell everybody that this is really the tip of the iceberg. Here, there's a lot more in the way of strategies in the book and how to deal with it. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, though, that a lot of the folks that are involved in the real estate industry, it's in some ways it's a very reactive business, because we'll get, and yes, we do schedule times to canvas for our properties that we're representing, but and that we can control, but can't necessarily control like when people are calling you or emailing you about the properties. And so what would your recommendation be on how to reconcile being reactive and responsive to our customers with being indistractable?
Sure. So the idea here is to plan for the things that require you to not be distracted. So if you want to be reactive throughout your day, I think that's fantastic. But if your job requires reflection, if you need time to strategize, if you need time to think, if you need time to plan, decide for yourself what that time will not include. So I'm not telling you to not take phone calls all day. I'm telling you to plan an hour a day to think. And in that time, I don't care who calls you. They can wait a few minutes, because if you don't carve out that time, you won't have that time to think. You'll be constantly reacting, prioritizing the urgent rather than the important, and that will come at your detriment. And so the idea here is, if you are in reactive mode all day, that's fine, right? If you work in a call center, for example, all you're doing all day is picking up phones, right? You're constantly just doing nothing but reacting. And if that's what your job entails, well, that's what your job entails. But I know for many real estate professionals, all they do is react, and they have no time for reflection, and that's very detrimental. So the idea here is, you put your phone on do not disturb while driving. They get an automatic reply. They don't need to know whether you're driving or not. That's none of their business. They'll get an automatic reply that says, look, if this is actually urgent, text the word urgent. And if it really is super urgent, they'll call you, right? But the idea here that normally, even when they get that reply, okay, it can wait 30 minutes, it can wait 45 minutes. The world's not going to end if they wait just a little bit. Because look, let's be honest, if you were showing someone a property, you wouldn't pick up a phone call in the middle of showing someone a property, because that's incredibly rude to your client. So why can't you give yourself what you give your customers? Why can't you give yourself the 45 minutes, the hour of reflection and thoughtfulness to help you grow your business?
I think that's a terrific way to handle it. Um, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or to put them in the chat box on the bottom right of the control panel, because we'd love to get your questions as well. So another question that I had, Nir, was when you showed us your time boxed calendar. Do you use calendar reminders to keep you on track with it, or are you just sort of
Yeah.
reflexively checking it? How do you?
No, so I use calendar reminders throughout my day, and those are called external triggers, and those are great, right? If the external trigger helps me remember, hey, it's time to work out, it's time for that meeting, it's time for that thing you plan to do, then it's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. But of course, I'm militant about removing the external triggers that don't serve me. I don't need a Facebook notification 100 times a day. I don't need to know what's happening in the New York Times and CNN, and I don't need that stuff all day long. I can check that on my schedule as opposed to the company that's trying to distract me's schedule.
Good. In the book, I know that you were getting a lot of information into a short time, but one of the concepts that intrigued me in the book was progressive extremism.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit more about that and how that fits in here?
Sure. So the idea of progressive extremism. So Indistractable is really about how do we break bad habits. And so the idea of progressive extremism helps us break these bad habits that take a long time to change. So as opposed to some people, some people have this technique of saying, okay, that's it, I'm never going to eat sugar ever again, or they say I'm cutting out all carbs, or they have these big ambitious plans, but they find that it's very, very difficult to do. Alternatively, some people say, they make the mistake of saying, okay, I'm going to go on a crash diet for 30 days. And for 30 days, I'm going to go on a detox or whatever, and I'm not going to have any of this type of food. And of course, neither of those strategies are really effective because if we don't do that behavior for the rest of our life, then what's the point? Right? If we're dieting so that we can get into our suit for our wedding or something, and then we go back to our old habits afterwards, well, then what have we accomplished, right? Not much. And so the idea here behind progressive extremism is to create long-term change in our life. We can use this method, which is to identify one thing that we would like to remove from our life that's very easy to do away with. So for me, I wanted to eat less sugar. But I didn't want to cut out all sugar. I wanted to start down this path of progressive extremism. So I asked myself, what was the easiest thing I could cut out of my life? And it happened to be right after Halloween that I had this revelation. And I noticed my daughter had candy corn that she collected. Candy corn, those
Sure.
little yeah, some people think
Love
they're
it. Love
gross.
it.
You love them. Okay. I think they're pretty gross, actually. But I would eat them because they were around. And it's all corn syrup, that stuff. It's not good for you. And so one day I decided, you know what, that's going to be the first thing. I am going to decide today that I am never going to eat candy corn ever again for the rest of my life. Now, that's pretty extreme, but I don't really like candy corn. If I loved candy corn, I wouldn't pick it. But I don't really like it. So for me, it was very easy to say, I'm never going to eat candy corn ever again. Okay. Then after a few weeks, I said, okay, what's the next thing I can do? So we used to buy sugary soda. And so I told myself this rule: never again will I drink sugary soda at home. I can have Coca-Cola outside the home. I can have it on when I travel, whatever, not inside the home. Then I said, a few months later, months now, it took a while, Then I said, I'm not going to have sugary soda anymore, ever, right? I'm only going to have diet soda. And then progressively, right? So now it went bit by bit by bit. And now I cut out these things and I review to myself what I cut out for the rest of my life. And so this is a much better way to stick with these long-term behavior changes that we try and make in our life by using this progressive extremism. So we think of something that's easy to do away with, right? We don't start with something that's very hard to stop doing. Start with something easy, but excise it from your life forever.
And that really you can sort of apply that to just about anything you want to change, it sounds like.
Right. Just make sure that the thing you're dumping is easy to do without for you. If it's hard, if you think you'll regret it, then it's too difficult. Don't make that the thing you cut out of your life. Pick something else.
And do you have any good strategies for developing self-compassion?
Yeah, so the key to self-compassion is really about talking to yourself the way you would talk to a good friend. That's really the key. And many of us, the conversations we have with ourselves, if people could hear what we said to ourselves, or if we talk to our friends the way we talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have any friends, right? We are our own worst critics. We beat ourselves up. And of course, that's not helpful. That's the opposite of self-compassion. So we really want to talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend. If a friend told you that they were struggling with distraction, what would you say to them? Well, that's what we would say to ourselves.
Sounds reasonable. And uh, having read Hooked and now Indistractable, how do you connect the dots between the two works?
Yeah, so Hooked is really about how to build good habits, and Indistractable is about how to break bad habits. And it's this vantage point from being an industry insider by studying this for the past decade now, that I have this vantage point to understand both sides of the coin.
Do you think that people have used Hooked for evil as well as good?
If they have, I haven't seen any examples of it. I think the bark out is louder than the bite. I haven't seen anybody using the hook model for bad habits. Not that, it's really the way that bad habits are applied. Is when a product preys upon somebody who can't make their own choices. So, for example, children. Getting kids to do something that is harmful to them is illegal in many ways. We have laws to protect children because children are a protected class. They're considered people who are not of, they haven't reached the age of maturity. We believe that they're not ready for certain experiences. And so we don't allow them to do certain things by law. And I think the other protected class out there are people who are pathologically addicted, right? People who are actually addicted to something. They also deserve special protection. But for the vast majority of us, we aren't addicted to our devices. We're distracted by them. We're not pathologically addicted. Give me a break. Saying you like it a lot does not mean you can't stop if you tried, right? So few people have actually even tried to do anything about it. And I just wrote a book, Indistractable, about telling you exactly what you should do to stop using these products. So I think by and large, the responsibility is not on the company to make a product that is less engaging. I mean, I think that's ridiculous, right? Should Netflix make their videos less engaging? No. Should Apple make the iPhone less user-friendly? Of course not. It's really up to us because these companies aren't going to do it for us. So, I've seen many, many examples of people using the hooked model for good. Companies like Kahoot get kids hooked to in-classroom learning. Companies like Fitbod get people hooked to exercising in the gym. So I think that the upside is much, much greater. I think the real problem is that most companies don't use these techniques. The problem isn't that some companies use them too much. The real problem is that the vast majority of technology companies out there, and businesses for that, all businesses for that matter, they should be using more consumer psychology. They should be finding ways to get customers hooked to their products because look, the fact is, most companies and services out there make great services that would greatly benefit their customers if their customer would just use the product. That's the problem that most companies have out there.
Have you seen the app Noom, the weight loss program?
No.
That's very interesting, and it uses behavioral psychology to help you develop healthy habits, and accountability for what it is that you're consuming, and not just to uh, say, okay, I'm going to do a diet for a month till I lose 15 pounds. I'm going to, it really encourages you to develop healthy habits, and by giving you little incremental lessons each day, it really is very, interesting. And I mean, I've struggled with my weight for all of my adult life, and in the last year and a half, I think I've lost about a little over 30 pounds. And it
Wow.
was before I started using them, which I just started a couple weeks ago, because I just wanted to, have a little something, have a little coach in my corner to. But it was kind of nice, 'cause, in the past I tried to do things, more extremely or whatever. You can't just wipe out carbs. I mean, one day you're going to have a piece of bread, and you never stop. So it's been, you know, and I think, a lot of things that I read in Indistractable, uh, by happenstance or luck, I was able to put into place this time, including self compassion, because I know that there are days when I'm going to want to have that slice of pizza. Damn it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and I was like, okay, I'll have the slice of pizza, and I'll go back to yogurt and fruit tomorrow, and so I think a lot of what is in Indistractable has really resonated with me on a personal level.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm so happy to hear. And what a great example of how we can use persuasive technology to help people improve their lives and build healthy habits. I think that's terrific.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Nir. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So my question is, when it comes to the timetables and scheduling out your day, it reminds me of like during college, during finals season, when my friends and I, we would block out, 2 hours on chemistry, 3 hours on math. But then for me, I stopped doing it because the second that I got off schedule, I would just kind of be like, screw it all, and same thing with like, it almost reminds me of dieting, like you were talking about, if you're too extreme about something, the second that you mess up, the second you have that piece of bread, it's all gone. So what advice do you have for someone like me who, when I don't stick to a schedule, I get frustrated and then kind of almost want to give up?
Yeah. So the problem is not that you were too extreme. The problem is that you didn't have a mechanism to get back on track. So there's a known psychological phenomenon that's called the what the hell effect. That is literally the name. It's called the what the hell effect. The what the hell effect says that when we're on track and then one small thing happens, right? You're following your diet and then you have one bite of cookie and you say, "Oh, what the hell? My day is ruined. I'll start my diet tomorrow." And you eat like crazy for the rest of the day. Right? So we have to be careful of that, understanding that that is a very normal human phenomenon, that we all do it, but that of course is not the right reaction, right? That we know that the appropriate thing to do is to say, okay, I had a cookie, but my diet starts with my next bite, not with the next day or the next year
Right.
or whenever we're going to procrastinate by. And so that's what's
On
so
Monday.
important about having, exactly, start at Monday. And so that's why it's so important about having a time box calendar, because when you do go off track and get distracted by something, you can then look back at the calendar and say, oh, what is it that I wanted to do right now? And start with the next time block. So that if you do go off track, it's okay. All of us get distracted from time to time. Becoming indistractable does not mean you never get distracted. It means you know why you get distracted and you strive to do something about it, to live with personal integrity, to do what you say you're going to do. So by having that time box calendar, you say, okay, I missed that block. Let me not miss the next block. And so you have an opportunity to get back on track with every block.
Got it. Thank you. That helps.
Absolutely. And then, by the way, you're revising your calendar from week to week, right? So just because you make that calendar once, you don't keep it in stone forever. No. You have time in your calendar once a week to look back at that calendar and say, wait, I'm noticing that I'm constantly messing up here. I constantly keep getting distracted here. Well, maybe that tells you that there's a planning problem, that you should allot more time or less time to each thing on your calendar to make it easier to follow in the week ahead.
Yep.
The It's funny, I started after reading Indistractable, started to time box my day, and people were at the gym were getting really surprised about why I was showing up earlier than I normally do, and I had to say, well, I'm trying to get my day
You're
on track.
indistractable.
Yeah.
Love it.
So anyway,
Does anyone else have any questions?
yeah.
Feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away or type in the chat box.
All right, well, we're waiting to see if anybody responds. I want to thank you again for A, writing the book, and B, giving us some of your time today. I think it was really valuable, and we will be sharing the video with everyone we can, and we may even post next week's blog post on our webinar today. So
I appreciate it. Well, thank you very much for having me, and appreciate the time and attention.
yeah, thank
No,
you.
thank you.
All right. Let's stay in touch. And what's last question? Do you have your next project in mind yet? Or are you still?
No, not yet, not yet. I'm still working on this one, and I write books when I have a problem that I find that others haven't solved. So when I have the next thing in my life that I want to improve and fix, then I'll keep you updated.
Okay. Well, I hope it doesn't disappoint. Sorry. I hope it doesn't involve disappointing your daughter again. So.
Hopefully not. Thanks.
All right.
All
Thanks
right.
again.
Take care. Good
All
talking
right.
to you.
Really appreciate
Bye bye.
it.
Thank you.